So in Year 10 Season 4, Mute has had some changes. Instead of his jammers acting like defending EMPs that would indiscriminately disable any attacking electronic gadget, they now act like, well, jamming devices. They jam electronic communication, which if we're being honest, is what a jammer should do. So because of this change, some gadgets are immune to Mute, some gadgets work differently in how Mute counters them. So I've tried my best to try and look at as many different interactions with the attacking team now with this new version of the Mute jammer. Do note, to compensate for this change, Mute is now a 2-speed again, and his jammer radiuses are bigger. There are some interactions which don't make 100% sense in my opinion, but Mute isn't as useless as people are making him out to be. And before we jump into this, I just got a message from Tom Clancy saying only 27% of you are subbed, so do me a favor, hit the sub button, and let's get into this. So let's first start off by looking at secondary gadgets, and the recruits are going to be very useful for this one, so we're going to use Striker, and I'm going to compare both breaching charges and hard breach charges, which will help you understand this system as well. So if we put a breaching charge on this soft wall, as you can see, because there is a Mute jammer on that wall, it disables the connection between the detonator in my hand and the actual breaching charge round itself. We cannot establish a connection between the two. And with the update that came as well, this also works the other way. So let's say we place this breaching charge outside of the range, but I'm in range of the Mute jammer and we have the effect icon at the bottom left of the screen. I also cannot establish that connection. This goes for anything which has a detonator. You'll see more of this in this video, but this is the main gist of this update. If it requires a connection from like a detonator or from a device to the gadget, and a Mute jammer is affecting either one of them, you won't be able to establish that connection. So that's kind of how it currently works with a bit more depth. It didn't work if you were in the radius before, but you know, we know if there's a Mute jammer on that wall, breaching charge doesn't work. However, if we look at now the secondary hard breach charge, which does work different, although there is a Mute jammer on this wall, what you're going to see here is, because we are not having to establish a connection to this hard breach charge, although there's a Mute jammer on that wall, the Mute jammer isn't disabling anything, because Mute jammers this whole time have been disabling stuff when they're meant to be jamming stuff. So I do understand the update here, but as you'll see more in this video, there's some stuff which doesn't really make as much sense. So the Mute jammer is jamming the connection between me and this breaching round. However, because there's nothing really for it to jam, like all I'm doing is placing a hard breach charge here. If we can place it on the floor, there we go. I'm just placing it. It's got nothing to jam. It can't, I'm pulling a pin. The pin is then activating. This has nothing to stop. So that makes sense, at least for breaching charges, and of course for hard breach charges. Clear the Mute jammer, you're then good to detonate. I think that makes quite a lot of sense, and I think you're probably following right now. Well, with the new changes to Mute jammer as well, claymores, which is another secondary gadget, are also no longer affected by the Mute jammer. Again, same logic applies here. This is kind of its own independent thing. I have no control over a claymore from my body view. I don't have to detonate it. I don't have to use my phone to activate anything on it. The claymore itself is its own standing gadget. This jammer has nothing to jam. There's no connection between me and this claymore for this to jam. It stands on its own. Although it's electronic, this isn't an EMP. This is a jammer. So there's no connection for it to jam. Like, I'll use the example because obviously drones, they're going to get jammed. As you can see, drive into the Mute jammer, the drone is jammed. That is because there's a connection between my phone and the drone, which the Mute jammer is interfering with. And now, obviously, it's vice versa as well. Let's say the drone is all the way over there. We're outside the Mute jammer's radius. We're good, blah, blah, blah. I walk into the Mute jammer. I go on my phone. I can't go on the drone. That is because the Mute jammer is interfering with the connection between my phone and the drone. However, there's no connection for it to interfere with the claymore. The claymore, although being electronic, I didn't necessarily mean to throw that there, but I guess you can still see, yeah, impact EMP still disable it. But because the claymore is electronic, but there's no connection to interfere with, the Mute jammer does absolutely nothing to it. So let's move over to some main operator gadgets. And I do want to apologize if I do repeat a lot of terminology in this video. I do want to hammer in the point so people do understand. But let's look at a Thermite charge now. We have a mute jammer on the other side of the wall. That Thermite charge is in the radius of that mute jammer, so it is going to be jamming the connection between my detonator and the Thermite charge itself. It did work like that before, but now here's another thing, okay? Let's say we take this Thermite charge off here. We got that mute jammer, and I don't know, let me place this Thermite charge over here, outside of the radius of the mute jammer itself. This is new with the update, and it keeps it more in line with like what I showed off with the drone and the soft breach charge as well, because Thermite right now is in the radius of this mute jammer, and his Thermite charge isn't. He cannot connect to that Thermite charge because his detonator is being jammed by the mute jammer. So still quite similar to how it used to work for Thermite before. There are other hard breachers who do have a different interaction now. I mean, you kind of just saw the same thing with the secondary hard breach charge now being able to bypass mute jammer, but because Thermite has to make a connection to his exothermic charge, that specific bit is being jammed, and then vice versa himself. If he is also standing in the mute jammer, it jams the connection. Right, let's move over to Fuze, because he's also going to give you a helpful understanding of this mechanic as well, since he also has the hard breach charge. But if we put a cluster charge on a wall, doesn't matter if it's reinforced or not, because you can place them on both. Similar effect to Thermite and the standard soft breach charge. Obviously, I think you probably understand it at this point as well, but that's why I wanted to repeat the point. It's jamming the connection between the two of them. Expect the outcome. But this is also going to give you a better understanding of stuff. This hard breach charge, however, will be fine. So I can see I'm not having to connect to that. I actually destroyed my Fuze charge. But yeah, I'm not having to connect to that hard breach charge, but I'm having to connect to the Fuze charge. And then same case with Thermite. Again, just trying to drum the point into you here. Even if that's outside the mute jammer effect, but I'm in the mute jammer effect, it jams the connection. These ones are pretty similar because they all use like a detonator, but we're going to get into some more ops like Grim and Deimos, where stuff is going to act a bit weird, and with Sens and stuff like that. So make sure you stick around for those ones. Right, so here we are on Blitz, an operator who is currently affected by mute in the main version of the game, but in Year 10 Season 4, do you think he'll still be affected by mute? Well, let's use the knowledge we applied and take a guess, but let's walk into the mute jammer, and I'm going to try to activate my gadget. Ready? There you go. Blitz is now immune to mute jammers. And if we use the same logic, I guess that makes sense, because all you're doing, you see that little switch down there? You're activating a button on a device you're holding. It's not like it's a detonator that you're using across the other side of the room, like with this breaching charge, for example. But the shield is in my hand. It's a button I'm pressing to activate a light in my hand. So there's not really much for it to jam, if that makes sense. There's not a full connection. It's a button on a mechanical piece I'm using. So the jammer does nothing to Blitz going forward. So my audio for the IQ bit got messed up, so I'll do a bit of commentary over it, but IQ is not affected by mute. This does make sense since she would be using some sort of thermal technology to see where these gadgets are, so a jamming effect like mute wouldn't necessarily interfere with what her scanner is doing. I know from like, I don't know, like when you look at it, you'd probably think, okay, well, this surely would have an interference with an electrical scanner, but I think it can be argued to like the nitty-gritty of it that IQ's scanner uses like a different method using thermal or maybe even like other small waves which are emitted by them, so I don't think a mute jammer would affect that, so this does seem like it makes sense. Right, here we have Blackbeard. His dash ability is most likely not going to be affected if we're using the same logic applied to Blitz. Let's try. Yeah, I mean, that one was kind of expected. Blackbeard's immune. Now with Hibana, you're probably going to be getting the gist of it now. Because it's remotely activated, the mute jammers will jam them. I think you kind of understand it now. And if she herself is in a mute jammer, it also jams her. But then you're good to go once they're gone. Kind of the same as Thermite and any other remote detonator, just that hers attached to her gadget rather than it being like a hand detonated one like Thermite. Jackal is completely immune to mute, even if the person you're tracking is in a jammer or if you're in a jammer yourself. The scanning technology sort of uses footprints in a similar way like the FBI would use fingerprints, for example, where it would like run it through the database and then you know which operator you are following. And it also is seemingly thermal again, if I'm not wrong, as well. So I can understand it being immune from those parts, and just because it's an electronic gadget he wears on his head doesn't mean it would necessarily stop like a scan of like a thermal device or like these footprints. You know, his gadget works in a very advanced way of what we have in real life. So we don't know like nitty-gritty details like that. But there is something I don't like about it, and that's the fact that you are getting a relayed information back to you. So surely there has to be some form of wireless connection for Jackal as the person and his team to get that information relayed to them via a ping. You know, you could say that's mainly just for gameplay things, but to me, and I have this problem later in this video as well, if you are getting a relayed information like a ping, that right there to me is a connection being made, which a mute jammer should disable, and it currently doesn't do that with this version of Jackal. So I don't know. I think if you're getting a ping, that means a connection is being established between you and that location, and a jammer should affect that. Personally, you may disagree. Now, I feel like Ying is worth investigating because when you stand in a mute jammer in a live build, it disables her smart glasses, so she can actually get blinded by her own candelas, which seems to still be the case? Hold on. Right. If we throw a candela into a mute jammer, it doesn't get affected by it. Okay. And I'm still immune because my glasses went up. But if I stand in the mute jammer and I throw the candela and I get... Will I get blind by this? Okay, so I still will get blind by this. Like when she pulled... Is it meant to be when she pulls out her candela, her glasses automatically know that to hide her vision, and then when you walk into a mute jammer, it's jamming that transmission? I guess I can understand that like, oh, okay, I know that I'm pulling out my Ying candela, or my glasses or goggles, whatever she uses, automatically knows this, but because you're in a mute jammer now, it's disabling the automatic connection. See, I don't know. Like, I guess I get it, but like, the same way you could argue that that's creating a connection to automatically put them on, the same way you could say that, well, Jackal's getting a ping back. Surely there's a connection being made there. Right, let's try some Dokkaebi. Mute isn't in any jammer. I am in a jammer. Right, you cannot use your gadget in a mute jammer because you wouldn't be able to connect to any phone. That makes sense. Let me destroy my mute jammer and then put Mute in the mute jammer. He should still be immune. So I'm gonna call, and yeah, his phone didn't go. So Dokkaebi seems to work the same way she did before, which makes sense. The jammer jams the whole phone call and stuff like that. That makes sense with both mechanics. Dokkaebi pretty much seems to be the same. Right, let's do a similar test with Lion. If I'm in a mute jammer, nope, it doesn't let me connect to the scanner. So let's destroy this one. Mute is in a mute jammer. Lion scans are going to come out. And Mute is going to get pinged, which makes sense. Lion scans use... it uses movement. It like scans the map from movement. It like vibrates the map sort of thing. So a mute jammer wouldn't have an effect on that. It doesn't currently, as far as I'm aware. Unless they changed it and I didn't realize. But yeah, this is the expected outcome. This one makes sense. I understand how... You know, Lion cannot establish a connection with the drone which is in the sky because in the mute jammer. However, when that drone is active, a mute jammer isn't going to stop doing its process. Isn't going to stop it from doing its process because that drone in the sky, where is it? Sort of like scans the map using like vibrations. That's like when you activate it, you'll see it will do like sort of that thing. So yeah, this makes sense with Lion. I understand this one. I'm not saying the other stuff doesn't make sense, but I feel like it's just kind of like twisted to how you want it to make. You know what I mean? Right, let's take a look at Finka. This is probably going to go how I expect it to go. I imagine that this is going to stop her from doing a Finka boost. Yeah, so Finka is going to be a bit like Dokkaebi in a sense, but for her teammates. So I don't have any teammates here, but the idea here will be Finka cannot activate her gadget in a mute jammer, but if I'm out of the mute jammer and I activate the gadget, this will heal everyone on the team, except, and I can't test this right now, but this is most likely how it's going to be because this is how it currently works as well. Let's pretend that Mute is one of my teammates. Let's pretend he is an attacking sledge, for example, right? If I Finka boost, everyone on the team, including Finka, will get healed except from Sledge, okay? That's because there is nanobots in his body. It's a little activation. That's what Finka does. So if the jammer jams the connection between Finka's detonator on her wrist and the nanobots there, he won't get healed. But there's other operators who will get healed, hence why Finka would still be able to do it. Just means this operator in the mute jammer radius wouldn't get that heal. And then, of course, if Finka herself's in the mute jammer, she can't connect to all of her teammates' nanobots. Therefore, the connection is jammed. That's how it currently works. It still works the same way, so this makes sense how it works with Finka. Yeah, some people don't even know it works like that, but that is how it works. So if she's in the mute jammer, she can't heal her teammates, and if any of your teammates are in a mute jammer, they will not get the effect of the healing, but everyone else who isn't in a mute jammer will. Cool, makes sense, nice. So Nomad is an operator who is currently affected by mute, but based on this new change, I don't think she will be. Let's shoot it. And yeah, she isn't affected. The air jab will go off. So I understand the change when it comes to this, and I understand wanting to update mute when it comes to... I mean, this makes sense. This is a good example because, I mean, just because this is an electronic gadget, theoretically, why would a jamming device interfect it? That's not a word. Interfere with it. So I understand this one for Nomad. Oh, damn, that was a backbreaker there. You good, buddy? So yeah, I understand this one, and also if you are in the jammer, obviously you can shoot it as well, just because it's like, you know, a launcher. So I get this. So I'm not saying I'm against this change, but there is some confusion, I think, and we'll move on to the next operator. Right, so here we have Nokk, and this one is gonna surprise some people, but I'll explain how it works in a sec. I've got my gadget active right now. I'm scrubbing myself from the cameras, but ready? The mute jammer is going to have an effect on my gadget. Now, this does make sense because let's say there's a camera there, right? What Nokk does is that she uses her gadget attached to her, and she basically like hacks into the feed of the cameras and removes herself from the image. That's what her gadget does. So it like sort of hacks the feed, scrubs herself from the image so she can be invisible from it. So there is technically a connection right now, although you don't do this. There's a connection between me and this camera, or any observation tool on the map. There is a connection being established. So, as mute jammers do their thing, that connection does get jammed. So, initially this might be surprising for a lot of people, but this actually does make sense, because there is a connection that it is jamming. Iana should be a pretty simple one, because she basically is just a drone. If you're in the radius of the jammer, you cannot deploy it. And if you're outside of the radius of the jammer and you enter the jammer, it disables the connection between them. Again, because there is, you know, a connection to be jammed there. That's how it currently works. That's how it still works. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Right, so Ace you may already be aware of because this was a big part of the reveal. He kind of works the same as the secondary hard breach charge, and you'll kind of understand the process now. If there's not a connection being made, there's nothing to jam. So Ace's gadget can bypass a mute jammer. As you can see, there is a mute jammer here, which will probably get destroyed. There you go. So the Ace charge usually destroys the mute jammer as well, so you could synergize this with another hard breacher, I guess, if you wanted to, because that Ace charge will destroy the mute jammer. Then you can allow like a Thermite charge to go off. But it's going to have no effect on it because there's nothing for it to jam. This is an aqua breacher that detonates off of contact. So it hits the wall and it already begins its breaching process. And then it uses like the water to seep into the metal and then expand and break. So there's nothing for this to jam. This does make sense. I will, yeah, it makes sense. I get it. I understand why they changed that. It makes the same sense as like the secondary hard breach charge. So that means that the only hard breachers that are affected by a mute jammer is Thermite and Hibana because they are remotely activated. All the other ones and the secondary hard breach charge are not affected by mute. Right, here we have Sam the Man Fisher, also known as Zero. He is just another drone operator, so we're not going to spend too much time on him. You can shoot your Argus launchers in a mute jammer because, I mean, yeah, it's a mechanical shooting device. But the same as any other camera, you can't use them if you're standing in the mute jammer because your phone's jammed. And of course, as you can see, we've got our 3 gadgets here, but the one which is in the radius of the mute jammer is going to be disabled. It's the exact same way Iana and the drones work and everything. I'm not going to dwell on it too long. You kind of understand how drones work. I don't know if this is a bug, by the way, but there isn't a disable effect. I think I would like to see at least a muted effect on these gadgets, which doesn't currently exist. So I don't know if that's a bug or that's an intended change with the update, but I would at least like to see some visual representation that this device is jammed. Right, let's try Flores. Let's first do it outside of a mute jammer. And we'll drive it into one. And the mute jammer will... Okay, wait. That's different. Unless this is bug? No. Okay, this is a completely different effect than before. Okay, let's see. If I'm in a mute jammer, I can deploy it. It doesn't go anywhere, though. I guess it's because it hasn't started its process yet. Because it's jammed. Right, this is interesting, because if I'm not wrong... if it hit a mute jammer before, it would stop in its place and then be muted and it would be stuck. But because it's not an EMP effect now, it's a jamming effect, as it should be. It stops your connection to it, but the thing keeps going because, you know, you're already moving it. The Flores drones move on their own. You have control over it, but because the mute jammer is jamming your connection to it, it doesn't stop the Flores drone, it just knocks you off it. But now I can probably... No, you can't even get back on it. That's how it's always been. I'm just being silly now. Okay, that is a new effect as far as I'm aware. So I'm controlling it. Uh-oh, we catch a mute jammer. I just lost control of the Flores drone, and now it's going to keep going. Before, it would just stop in the mute jammer. Okay, so that's an entirely new way to play Mute and Flores. And of course, if you deploy it in a mute jammer, it won't move. And okay, I guess that makes sense as well because it hasn't started its detonation process yet. Then you pick it up and then you can control it again. Okay, that's interesting. That is definitely a new way for Mute and Flores to interact. I kind of like that. That makes a lot more sense than before, in my opinion. Right, here we are on Sens, and I know this one is a bit weird because I saw Core Ross's short on it, and I have to agree with him. So, if I was to throw this ROU into the mute jammers, it will just go on and deploy. This makes sense using the logic that we just used for other operator gadgets, that although it's electronic, there's not really a connection for it to jam. I'm not, you know, turning them on. It's part of the process of this gadget to drop projectors and then deploy them. So using the logic that we use with Ace, that we use with like the secondary hard breach charge, yeah, this makes sense that a mute jammer doesn't affect this. However, Sens did get an update a few seasons ago that they can turn their gadget off and on, which would require them to have a connection to the gadget. So theoretically speaking, let's say we turn them off and we throw them in these mute jammers, okay? I have these turned off by choice right now. Although they have deployed, which is fair, and we've made the logical assumption that that makes sense, I shouldn't be able to turn these on. But I can. I can turn these off and on, which doesn't make sense. These should be interfering with the connection. Even if I'm standing in the mute jammer, I can still turn them off and on. So this doesn't make sense. Maybe this is an oversight, but based on the rules we have established, I am making a connection between myself and these projectors to turn them off and on. If either of these, or I don't know, I'm speaking like that. If any of these or myself are in the radius of a mute jammer, I shouldn't be able to do that. But I can. This doesn't make sense. This is inconsistent with the rules we have established. And yeah, this definitely needs to be updated. So what I think should happen, right, is say we have these mute jammers. In my position right now, not being jammed, I can turn these on and off, right? But if they are going in that state and they deploy in these mute jammers, they should be stuck in the state I have chosen them for. So if I choose to roll them on, and yeah, they deploy, but because they're in the mute jammers, I shouldn't be able to turn these off. They should be able to deploy like they are. They should be able to turn on because of that rule that we have to jam a connection, and they're deploying on their own. But then I shouldn't be able to make the choice afterwards to turn them off and on. You know what I mean? So yeah, bit of an inconsistency with Sens. Maybe this was an oversight, but that definitely has to be changed. Right, so this is a big one which people have been talking about, and that is Grim. So let's place some mute jammers down as mute. I'll do this first because I know people ask. Obviously, you can shoot Grim's canisters whilst in a mute jammer. That's never not been a thing, and you know, it makes sense. It's a mechanical launcher shooting in an electronic gadget, so a mute jammer wouldn't stop that. But how it currently is if you shoot a mute jammer, if you shoot a Grim canister into a mute jammer, the canister usually gets muted. It doesn't get muted anymore. That makes sense with the logic we have used of just because it's an electronic gadget, it's still a mechanical process deploying them. Therefore, there's nothing for this to jam. You know what I mean? That makes sense. We've established that in this video, that there's nothing for that to jam. It can still deploy. But here's an inconsistency which I disagree with, okay? Let's say we've established that, yeah, it can still deploy in a mute jammer, but how are these bees relaying the info to me that mute is there when they are jammed, if that makes sense? So their actual existence isn't being jammed, which I think makes sense and I can understand. But how are they relaying the information to Grim and the rest of the team that they are spotting an operator if that connection between them is being jammed by a mute jammer? That's the inconsistency here. Them being able to deploy in a mute jammer makes sense. However, them actually pinging someone in a mute jammer doesn't make sense. There should not be a connection between them and me to relay this ping. I should not know that that person is there because there is a mute jammer. There has to be a connection for this to work. Therefore, mute should step in and stop that. I don't like that. That's a big inconsistency I have with this new mute update. Right, we'll quickly glaze over this one, but I know people ask. Brava, she's a drone operator, so, you know, Clutch drone will get disabled in a mute jammer. If you try going your cams in the mute jammer, it will also disable you. Now, we can... I probably won't do it in this video because it will take a lot of work to do, and I don't think I've got the time for it right now. We can try and look at the inverse effect of a mute jammer. So when a mute jammer is hacked, how does it have an effect on attacking gadgets now with its new change in philosophy based on mute jammers? Let me know if you want to see that one. I would definitely be open to doing it. Probably wouldn't be this video, but I'd be happy to look into more and get some people on and do some more testing on how a hacked mute jammer now works with the change. Ram is an interesting one. She has a detonator, so you'll probably understand how this will go for the most part. If you place the boogie... Wow, is she riding that thing? If the boogie obviously is in the mute jammer, I have a detonator. It can't establish the connection between us. It actually lets you place more than once, though. Wait, is that meant to be an intended feature? Okay, this doesn't feel like that's intentional. I'm going to pick these up just to continue this test, but I will look into that in a sec. And if the boogie itself is, let's say it's over here, it's outside the radius of the mute jammer, I'm in the mute jammer, I also can't establish the connection. Yeah, Ram's definitely bugged, by the way. I don't think you're meant to be able to place this many. But yeah, I can't establish a connection between this one either. You know, it's the same thing with Thermite and stuff like that. But if it gets detonated and we're both outside of the mute jammer, it won't get stopped by the mute jammer because it's already started its process. So you can see, it'll just keep going. Not too much different from what we currently have with Ram. I want to look at this, though. What one of them starts? Do they both start? Oh. Okay, that's weird. I think that part's a bug. But yeah, Ram, yeah, she kind of works as intended. Right, you may be happy to hear that Deimos works exactly as it does before. If he is in a mute jammer, he cannot send out his probe. If the defender he wants to track is currently in a mute jammer, he cannot send out his probe. That makes sense. It has to establish a connection with them. If the defender he wants to track is outside of the mute jammer, and then he begins to track said operator, we'll wait till mute is tracked. There we go. And then he runs into the mute jammer. Again, the connection is now disabled because his probe cannot create a connection between him and mute. There you go. The probe is back because it's not being jammed. And then back at it again mute is jammed. Exact same way that it currently works for Deimos. No changes here. Now, if you weren't aware, Rauora was actually affected by Mute's gadget. I don't know if she still is. We're about to test that. But that's obviously because the jammer acted like an EMP. The top of the DOM panel, so this part, this is electronic. That's how it knows to let, like, it knows to let drones in. It knows to open up and stuff like that. That part is electronic at the top. So, I do wonder, because you're not actually making a direct connection here, I don't think he's going to affect her anymore. Let's try. And the Mute Jammer does reach, because Mute Jammer's got a buffed radius this season as well. So let's see. Yeah. Absolutely no effect at all. Of course, the drone, it will open up for the drone, but the drone will get hit by the Mute Jammer. I want to make sure as well, we can open this up, just to make sure that the jammer is in radius. I want to go on this desk here. I'm switching to mute right now. And we'll place a Mute Jammer on here to like 100% confirm that it is in radius with the top of this thing. So there you go. Yeah, absolutely no effect at all on the Mute Jammer. On the, sorry, on the DOM panel. I just got caught by that, but yeah. Mute Jammers now have no effect on DOM panels whatsoever. I don't even think they affect, well, they shouldn't affect their deployment anyway because it's mechanical. So yeah, Rauora completely immune to, is that how she holds her hands like that? That looks uncomfortable. Completely immune to Mute.